Hello everybody, welcome to the last lesson of the year. Welcome to Big Ideas 9.5. This lesson is on something called the quadratic formula, my beloved. I absolutely love the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is a way to help us solve for x all in one step. No funny business with completing the square, no funny business with factoring. We can just solve. Now, I just want to let you know when the best time to use this is. However, it can be used for any quadratic equation. I'm talking if you have x squared plus 5x plus, so let's do minus 6, sure, you can use it for that case. If you have like an AC method problem where you have like 3x squared minus 9x plus 6, or minus 11x plus 6, yeah, you can absolutely do it there. If you have something ridiculous that cannot be solved, like x squared minus 2x plus 100, just 100, there's no number that multiplies to make 100 and adds to make negative 2, but it doesn't matter. You can still solve using the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is a catch-all for the entirety of solving for x. So on page 299, there's a list of some of the advantages and disadvantages of each method. Factoring is what we've mainly been working with. We learned different ways of factoring, and it's fairly straightforward. The problem is there are some equations that cannot be factored, like that x squared minus 2x plus 100. You could also graph, but sometimes your graphs might not be exact. You could solve using square roots, like if you know that x squared equals some number, sure, it's easy, but again, it can only be used if your other side is a perfect square. Completing the square, we just talked about in lesson 9.4, and that's best used when you don't have an a value, when your b value is even, but it's kind of tricky to do. The quadratic formula can be used for any quadratic equation and gives you the exact solutions. The only problem is, until you get good at it, it's going to take some time. Once you get good at it, you can do this in your sleep. I think it's about time I showed you the quadratic formula. Now, before I show you this, the best way to learn the quadratic formula is through song. And no, I'm not kidding here. There is a quadratic formula song that everyone I know has used or learned, and it makes it so much easier to memorize. The quadratic formula goes like this. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The actual song for this can be found in the description. Please watch that video before you return to these notes. But this is the quadratic formula. Now you might say, Mr. Strager, this does not look straightforward at all. This looks like a mess. And you're right, it does look like a mess. But the key with this mess is every one of our calculations that we have to do is simple. Like b squared is just squaring a number. 4 times a times c, we're just multiplying three numbers together. 2 times a is just multiplying some numbers. Each individual calculation here is very, very simple. It's just that the whole thing looks crazy. Let me give you an example problem that we will solve using the quadratic formula. Let's actually use the problem that I put up before. Let's use x squared plus 5x minus 6. Let's use the quadratic formula to solve this. Once again, the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All we need to do is plug in the numbers. So what's our b value here? Our b value is 5. That's our b. So into our formula we plug it. X is equal to negative, instead of b, we're putting 5. plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, b squared is just 5 squared. And I'm writing down every single step, but if you know that 5 squared is 25, don't waste your time writing this down, just put 25 in there. Minus 4ac, so we need to find our a value and our c value. Well, our a value is what comes before the x squared, but we don't have a number in front of the x squared. Well, remember, if you don't have an a value, your a value is secretly 1. Our a value is what's in front of the x squared, or what's multiplying the x squared. If you don't have one, it means it's 1. So times 4 times 1, and what's our c value? Our c value is -6. Remember the negative signs. They do matter when you're plugging it in. So it's 5 squared minus 4 times -1 times -6 all over 2a. Well, our a value we mentioned is 1. Perfect. Let's start simplifying, y'all. Well, we know that -5 plus or minus the square root. What's 5 squared? 5 squared is 25. Now, we're going to subtract 4 times 1 times -6. 4 times 1 is 4, times -6 is -24. So, minus -24, we're just going to add 24. Again, that's because -4 times 1 times -6 is positive 24. All over 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. Well, hold up. 25 plus 24 can be simplified. Certainly, can't it? What is 25 plus 24? That's going to give us 49. And, whoa, 49 is a perfect square. So when we take the square root of 49, we get -5 plus or minus 7. The square root of 49 is 7, all over 2. These are our two answers. Remember that plus and minus means that we have two versions of our answer, one with a plus and one with a minus. So our first version of the answer is x is equal to -5 plus 7 over 2. Our second version is x is equal to -5 minus 7 over 2. Well, -5 plus 7 is going to give us 2. 2 over 2 is just 1. So x equals 1 is one of our answers. -5 minus 7 is -12. What's -12 divided by 2? It's -6. So our two answers are x equals 1 and x equals -6. And we're done. Again, it looks like a lot because it's a longer equation. It takes some time. But each of the calculations are super simple. I always recommend, if none of the other factors work for you, and you have to solve a problem that equals 0, that's something I forgot, you can solve using the quadratic formula. The key is, because it's asking you to solve, it will not be a substitution for factoring. If it doesn't have an equal 0, you're going to have to factor if it's asking you to factor. Only if it asks you to solve can you use the quadratic formula. Let's do one more together. Let's do one that's going to give us something crazy, something that just doesn't work in any other way. Let's do x squared minus 2x equals, let's do -10. You could complete this by completing the square, but I'm going to let you know right now, it's going to be a tough one. There's nothing that we can do to factor this right now. If we moved everything to the same side, which is required for the quadratic formula, we wanted everything to be on the same side, we would end up with x squared minus 2x, plus 10 equals 0. Can you think of two numbers that multiply to make 10 and add to make negative 2? Because I can't. 1 and 10 wouldn't work. 2 and 5 wouldn't work. So we're screwed, right? There's nothing we can do. Unless we can use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Try this problem out on your own. Pause the video here and see if you can get an answer. Did we finish it? Let's do it together. X is equal to negative b. Well, our b value here is negative 2. So let's plug in negative 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared is negative 2 squared minus 4ac. Once again, our a value is just 1 because there's nothing in front of the x squared. This time our c value is 10. We're going to have something very interesting happen here. All over 2a, once again, our a value is 1. So what this is really asking is x is equal to positive 2, since negative 2 is just 2, square root of 4 minus 40 divided by 2. 4 minus 40 is negative 36, but we have a problem here. Houston, we've got a problem. Sorry, let me rewrite this. Plus or minus negative 36 all over 2. What's the square root of negative 36? Uh-oh. This problem cannot be solved, right? I mean, look at it. The square root of negative 36 doesn't exist. If this is the case, it means that there are no solutions to this problem. No solutions. You can't square root negative 36. However, let's see if we changed up our problem slightly. Let's say we had x squared minus 2x minus 10 equals 0. This one would be solvable. If you want the practice, it would be the same thing, it's just this would be positive 36. This can also help us solve completely unsolvable problems, or unsolvable by other methods, but that will still give us answers. Let's do an example together of a problem that will still give us some answers. Let's see what happens if we did x squared plus, let's do 10x minus 3 equals 0. Again, this is unsolvable because there's nothing that multiplies to make negative 3 and adds to make positive 10. So, we use the quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. If we actually go through and do this, we would get x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root. To skip a step, instead of writing down 10 squared, I'm just going to write 100 because we know 10 squared is 100. Minus 4 times a, again I made it 1 to make it nicer, c, which is negative 3 all over 2a. Well, negative 4 times 1 times negative 3 is positive 12, right? So this becomes negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 plus 12 is 112. All over 2a. Sorry, 2 times 1, I should say, so it's just 2. This will not give you nice numbers, but it will still give you numbers if you plug it into a calculator. You would get decimals. We don't very much like decimals as our answers. So, what can we do? we can simply write our answer with this square root inside. We would simply say x equals negative 10 plus the square root of 112 over 2, and we would say x equals negative 10 minus the square root of 112 over 2. There we go. Now, we haven't learned methods of simplifying square roots. However, if you know the secrets of simplifying square roots, you might know, for instance, that square root of 112 is just the square root of 4 times 28. Is that right? Sorry, I got that incorrect. 4 times 20. No, it is 28. I apologize. 112 is 4 times 28. So we could just split up into the square root of 4 times the square root of 28. Square root of 4 can be definitely simplified. Square root of 4 is just going to be 2. So you could write it as 2 times the square root of 28. If you wanted to simplify it in this way, you would just write x equals negative 10 plus 2 times the square root of 28 over 2, and x equals negative 10 minus 2 times the square root of 28 over 2, and you could divide both of these by 2. Again, we've not learned this method, so I wouldn't expect you to know that these can simplify to negative 5 plus the square root of 28 and negative 5 minus the square root of 28. I would not expect you to know this part. You can just write your answer like this. All right, everybody. This concludes our lessons on the quadratic formula and concludes all we're going to talk about from Unit 9. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and if you didn't hear it from me in other classes, have a fantastic summer as well. Have a good one.